So this right here is my mix template. Reaper actually has it built in that you can use a mix template. They call it project template right here in their file menu system. And the advantage to having these as opposed to just saving a project is that you can't overwrite these. I mean, you can overwrite them, but you have to go in and save project as template. And once you open these, if you hit save as, like if I hit file, save, it won't overwrite it. So this is my full mix prep template or template. I don't know how you pronounce it, but I say template. And it has not all the plugins I'll use. These are choices. And as I've said before, if you were going to be recording a song, would you disassemble your recording equipment after the session's over? No, you would leave that stuff plugged in. So this is essentially the same idea where you already have the plugins that you like to use on certain instruments ready to go. Now, first of all, and I'm not going to show this, but the very first thing I do is check for noise. If there is an excessive amount of noise in a track, I don't use the plugin. I will use the standalone Isotope RX6 to remove noise. I've been using this plugin / program since version 2, and it just delivers great results. I usually use the highest quality setting because, we're living in a i7 quad core plus age. So yeah, it made sense. I guess if you're doing it in real time, then A or B is good. But D in the standalone version works perfectly fine. This is the Hornet VU meter, and they just released a brand new version actually between the time I'm recording this video and the time that I released the 2019 edition of this analog recording studio in a box series. And what this plugin's good for is getting your levels that if you didn't record them, or even if you did record them, you got to get your levels right. This makes it a lot easier, and when I actually show this plugin off, you can see how it works. So I don't want to actually talk about this too much, but you can see the list of plugins. I'll quickly go through them, and then I'm going to actually show you how I do it for real. Because again, I'm not using every single one of these plugins. I don't need every single one of these plugins. These are just things that I've gotten over the past 11 years of professionally mixing and mastering music. So this is my vocal plugin selection. I like using these plugins for vocals. Again, not all of them will be used, but I have them if I need them. And this is background vocals. So a little bit less selection of EQs and compressors than with the regular vocals. But if I ever need to, I have other plugins I could use. But for background vocals, I've found that it doesn't need as much EQ as lead vocals. Actually, you do a lot more cutting than you do anything, and they don't really need to stand out as much. And also, I should mention, when doing mix prep, if you're given let's say 10 tracks of background vocals, now is the time to actually consider having a background vocals mix prep session so that you can mix those down to stereo tracks just to save on, they call it screen real estate space, because then you can get rid of these 2 tracks right here and then go on. By the way, these color codes are brought to you by Mark Mozart's mixing book, which I will put on screen right now. I got the advice from him because he said that color coding tracks this way is apparently the best psychological way of doing things. I'll take his word on that. It works for me. I just need something that's consistent. And the other key thing is that you always have your tracks in the same order so that you're not always looking, where's my vocals at? Where are my guitars at? They're always going to be in the same place. That's key. All right, moving on. Let's see. I think one more background vocal, or what is this? Yeah, this is just another background vocal track. I have this open just in case I need any more. Or what I can do is right click it and choose duplicate. And then I'll make another one. I'll just do it on this one since it'll load faster. And see, and then you just rename it to 4 or whatever. So next up, we got guitars. GTR is the shorthand way of saying that. So again, RX6, because a lot of times guitars have noise. But realistically, I don't need this plugin because I don't use it. And I'll also get rid of it on this because, again, I don't use it except to teach you guys that I do use it. And that's the only reason I had it loaded up, is as a reminder to myself to tell you guys that. So again, the very first plugin is Hornet VU Meter. And what I love about it is, the grouping feature. The grouping feature and the peaking feature are huge to me. So bit shift gain, another great plugin for gain staging, and then purest gain as well. I found out recently you're not supposed to combine these plugins, so you're either doing one or the other. Bit shift gain can only go in 6 decibel increments, and with purest gain you can go down to 100th decibels. So the second category. I mean, technically it goes a little bit more precise than that. Only thing is I can't click and change this, so I don't know if that's a Reaper limitation or maybe there is a way to do that. If anybody knows in the comment section, let me know. Other than that, let's just keep going through this. So I have my typical clean EQ for cutting. Here we have another noise reduction option, brush free from Clevegrand. And then we also have a noise gate. See how I really have a love-hate relationship with guitars. I love high gain or overdriven guitars, but man, can they be noisy, especially when you add compression. Okay, moving on. Now here's an interesting thing. I have been reading Gears, and there's been a major conversation going on in the past week about gain staging the Acustica Audio preamps. And apparently, at some point in time in the past year or two, they changed it so that the input trim, if it's set to 0, that means that your level should actually be at 0. Meaning, the old setting of -18, and if you go and look in Navy or any plugin, I think older than like Core 12, they are all set to about -18. So actually, if you want to get some harmonics into the signal, like say Slate VCC does, then yes, you will need to actually boost this around +18 or +24, and then you'll get your saturation like you have in your other plugins. I was not aware of this until this very lengthy conversation happened over the past week or so, and yeah. So just to let you all know that. And in fact, I might just change the default to be +18. Moving on. Once again, well, it's doing that because I had it disabled, but input level, so important. You know what? I should just go through these and I'll show you how to use them once I'm not showing you. So I like it looking at the GUIs. And I don't know why I have this on here. Yeah, that shouldn't be on here. This is actually something to be saved for the mix. So yeah, I'm gonna have to change that. I tell you, these plugins, the mix prep template, I am changing it at least once a month, if not sometimes once a week. If a new plugin comes out that I really like, then it gets added. If I, especially like a freebie, then that's not an issue. If I buy it, obviously, I'd like to have it. If I buy a plugin anytime these days, that means I really, really like it and it does something that my other plugins don't do. By the way, once again, we have a Acustica Audio preamp that I believe should be set to +18 to be equal to 0. So let me do that right now. All right. And that's it for that. Guitar 2 basically has the same plugins. It's just another track for anything you want. Now, I should probably... Actually, I did use some different plugins on here just to show you I have them. And I'm not like an Acustica Audio fanboy because sometimes, hey, maybe the IKs sound better. Maybe sometimes the vocals sound better. I just want to have those as options. And if I really want to just, say, hey, I like this plugin better, I can always just drag and drop it. I did forget to mention a very important thing, and I already changed the order of this. When you start doing your mix prep, do not forget to save, and save often. So, initially do file save or Control S while you're working. I'm always pressing Control S. I'm a Control S OCD person. Seriously, like I'll do one thing and press Control S, because guess what? Programs crash. Even Reaper. Even though Reaper crashes a lot less than other DAWs, it still crashes. Mainly because the third-party plugins are doing things, and because I also have Chrome open in the background, and there's like 10 or 20 or 30 tabs open. Anyway, just being honest, bass guitar, here we go. So I have some virtual amps going on there, and I love the API 560 equalizer. Also, the API 550B works well for bass guitar, and absolutely LA3A all day long for bass guitar, and also a gate stay level or retro instruments stay level compressor. Also, I like my limiters, although I might wait until the mix to use this. If I can get a bass to sound more even during mix prep, then great. And then finally we got this, which I could also once again change. I'm not going to change anything else because I am not going to be saving this template. I might have to redo it again. But anyway, on to drums. First of all, the kick drum, which, as you notice, is right next to the bass guitar. And that's for a good reason, because I want to see these tracks. And if I would need to do a side chain, these tracks are right next to each other. Kick and bass are so important to get correct. It's right up there with vocals, so I have them there. In fact, if I was talking about track order, then I would move these two over to here. But anyway, moving on, kick drum, yeah, DBX 160. And if for some reason the kick drum is awful, I'll use Slate Trigger. If not, then we'll try to pull out all the stops. Once again, bass instruments love the API 560, and that's what this is. I'll call it a cleaner clone, because it doesn't have the typical analog stuff, but it has the curves, and it also uses a lot less CPU power. But this one, if you want it, is a lot more closer to the hardware. So either of these two plugins, obviously I prefer the acoustical audio version out of the two. But sometimes I want to use the IK. You want to know why? Because I spent money on it. That's why. And then also we have, basically this is a VCA channel strip compressor emulation. A lot of people forget how good this compressor is, the FG401, but that's not the case with the 1176 type of compressors, which this is a Revision D type of clone. And I would venture to say this is the best 1176 Revision D clone in the box. Moving on. I don't know what I'm clicking anymore. Okay. And we also have, this is like a cleaner DBX 160. Some people say it's not as good. I like having options, so here it is. And then finally, once again, we have a SSL line input amplifier thing plugin. And what I like about Sand 3 is, look at this. You can choose all these different simulated or sampled line inputs. I think there's 32. Yeah, there's 32 total. So I don't know what I had it on, but anyway, there you go. And again, input trim needs to be set higher. Overheads, same deal, man. I'm going too fast. Now, I like to use filters for the overheads because I like to give the kick drum microphone and the tom drum low end to the close microphones. And the overheads, I like to just have like the higher end, a little bit of the snare drum, and these are some solid filters. They're very low minimum phase filters. Another one I like on the overheads is the Bax EQ from Acoustical Audio. The high end especially sounds good, but by far my favorite is the API EQs. I just use these all the time, and by default, I have the high shelf one. By the way, I forgot to mention that if there are particular settings that you tend to use with your plugins, you should have those on for your mix prep template. Again, it saves time, it saves money, saves frustration. And then to wrap it up, we have a tape plugin, which I don't necessarily always use for drum overheads. And by the way, if you're setting based on VU, they should probably, well, if you're only hearing cymbals, then they'll probably be around this area, and the snare drum will be a little bit higher. Just a tip, because high end doesn't typically come through like it should. That's just the way VU meters work. And then we finally, once again, have an SSL, I believe 4000G line input emulation. Overhead right is basically the same darn thing. And in fact, a lot of times I'll just run these two tracks through an overhead bus, and that'll be that. All right, now this track is interesting because you don't always have the luxury of a drum room microphone. So if I don't have that, I will actually make that track. And I did a video about this, which I will link to if you look in the upper right corner right now. There's a video I put out a long time ago about how to simulate a drum room microphone. But if you have a real drum room track, that's even better. But yeah, this is what the track's normally used for typical home studio recordings, where you don't have like 12 tracks or 16 tracks to record with. So I actually have some plugins that I didn't use yet, which is this one. This is the 1176 All Buttons In trick, which, by the way, I didn't put it on here. I'm going to load it up right now. But what that does is, to a drum room mic, it smashes it, and it makes it sound fake. But see, the trick is you're not going to hear the fakeness. You're going to bring that track just up a little bit when you're mixing. And the idea is that you retain some of the high end, some of the low end, but the idea is that it just makes drums sound bigger, as if you were in the room with the drum player. That's the best way to put it. But again, you don't want to have that track be too loud. And then finally, just like before, I can either use Slate VCC on, I like the E setting or the G setting. API is good too, the USA. But yeah, the Brit 4K G or Brit 4K E settings are what I like the best. Or I just got this plugin less than 30 days ago, Sand 3, and again though, input trim up higher. So because of that new information, I'm going to have to go through and change my mix template and watch them change it back after I go through and do it, right? That's just how it goes. So let's see, what else? Snare drum. Oh God, snare drum. So snare drum, the first plugin I have is Trigger, because a lot of times the snare drum just doesn't sound good. It doesn't. And a lot of that has to do with either using old drum heads or not tuning it properly, or maybe not having a nice $600 Black Beauty snare drum. I can tell you guys for a fact that when I used a Supraphonic which apparently is one of the most recorded snare drums in history. That drum just sounded awesome. So, going through the list, snare drum, very important in a mix. And I also added True Iron to this, even though I still have a demo of it. I wanted to show this because, if all you have is one plugin to get saturation, I recommend this one. The other one I would recommend trying is IK Saturator X. But True Iron is the one. This just can be used for if you want a microphone preamp or a line input. I know it doesn't say that, and it's a very, just straightforward interface, but I'm telling you, flip through these models here and just add that analog flavor to your tracks. Okay, this is actually the plugin I wanted to talk about with the drum room, because it has a little hidden feature. A lot of people don't know about this, but along with, I believe this was a Focusrite ISA 430 sampling, they also for some reason sampled an 1176 compressor, and that's hidden in the release on this compressor. So if you flip it to nuke mode in this region right here, but I would say, go all the way counterclockwise, this will get you an 1176 type of flavor. Now, I still like Slate Monster, but this is another way to try it out. Unfortunately, Seal is no longer free, but for those of you who've been watching Real Home Recording for a while, I think a lot of you guys did get in on this offer. So don't discount this plugin, because I'm telling you, from the Airband to the nuke compressor and the clean compression, and just, this is basically like having a later model Neve, because that's exactly what Focusrite consoles were. They were Rupert Neve designs. Okay, then we have, again, the API preamps. We had the API EQs. I know you probably are sick of seeing the APIs, but, here, once again, we also have the DBX 160. Sounds great on snare drum. For some reason, the white 2A, I don't know if an actual LA 2A sounds good on snare drum, but this compressor plugin does. And we also have the DBX 165 emulation plugin from Arturia. Tape, line inputs, you know the drill. Tom drum. Actually, I would say that my first plugin that I reach for with tom drums, once again, because a lot of times they just aren't recorded right and they don't sound good, is Trigger from Slate. Why waste my time trying to EQ and compress a poorly recorded drum when I could just put this on and have a great sounding tom drum track? Seriously. But if you prefer, this is what I normally use. Same thing with the other tom drum tracks. 1176. I also like Neve. So, we can get all kinds of EQs going on, but realistically, 9 times out of 10, I'm just replacing them with Trigger. Same thing with the Floor or Tom 3. And by the way, it's important that even if you are using sample replacement, even out the levels of that original track. And I don't think EQ really matters that much, but, gate, so that it's not picking up any nonsense tracks. I usually just go through the track and listen to the real hits and then get rid of the ones that aren't there if I'm using Trigger. But yeah, if you insist on using the original tracks, then so be it. They just won't sound as professional. Finally, my keyboard track. And sometimes I'll have more than this. Keyboard, I just basically call it anything that's like a piano or anything that's a synthesizer, so I'll have more than one track a lot of times depending on the genre of music, but for the most part, I just like to have one track ready to go because I typically am recording and mixing real instruments. But if I have to, these are the plugins I like for the keyboard. And that's it for that. And I actually took way longer to talk about these. So what I think I might do is make this one part 1. And then I'll go to part 2 where I actually use this stuff in practice. So go to that video now. I'll put a link on screen and whatever. Thanks for watching.